made in terms of how we teach. And here is the funny thing about that. In our classrooms, across all content areas, we're experiencing all genres. We're looking at narrative, we're looking at informational, we're looking at opinion, we're looking at argument. And yet we're focusing the writing instruction on one genre specifically. So we needed to really look at how do we broaden that scope? And I'm going to be the first one to say, I came from a state where we focused on a particular genre. And at the time when there's the change was made to go to multiple genres at every grade level, Empowering Writers was in full bloom at the time. And I thought, wow, this is going to be really hard for teachers to be able to really address this thoroughly. What I learned was, and what I really started to see was, it really helped our reading instruction to dive into those genres throughout the year. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that as we dive in to what we're going to address today. So I want you to think about this for a minute. What if every single time we read or we write, we recognize that writing-reading connection? First, through the genre. What kind of genre is it? Is it narrative? Is it informational? Is it opinion? And then through the organization and author's purpose. So if I know I'm reading a narrative piece, there's a predictable organization that takes place, and the author wrote it for a particular purpose. What if every single time we were reading or writing, we had a proactive interaction with text? That means that every reading experience becomes a pre-writing experience, and every writing experience becomes a pre-reading experience. What if we can maximize our instructional time? We're all going to talk about that instructional time. How do we use it well? By recognizing the connection in all text through all content areas, meaning that as we start to teach students about what good writing looks like, we're going to revisit that every single time we look at text. What if we set up our instruction that way? And that's really what our Foundations of Literacy is all about. And so what I want you to take a moment and think about, take a look at what we have here on the slide, our Venn diagram. And I want you to think about this in terms of all of the text we have in front of our students. And really what we want to do here is, for those of you who are familiar with Empowering Writers, and I know many of you are, you know that we spend the first good 5 or 6 weeks of school analyzing and annotating text. We spend a lot of time looking at text, author's purpose, how is it, why did the author write it? How is it organized? What's the graphic organizer? How can I summarize that? And all of us as Empowering Writers trainers always get the question, when are we going to write? Or why do we have to spend so much time annotating and analyzing? When are we going to get to actually putting our pencil to paper? And what we really want to show you is why this is so important. Why is it so important that we look at writing through the lens of authors first before we jump into putting our pencil to the paper? And so that's what the Foundations of Literacy is about. And here's what I want you to think about as we walk through our presentation today. Always we look at writing through, first of all, why did the author write it? What's the genre? How is it organized? What graphic organizer did the author use to develop this piece? How do they summarize it? How can I look at the content of this piece and summarize it? All of that is revealed through the process of annotation and analysis. You'll notice in the Venn diagram that we have on one side informational, and on the other side we have narrative. Those are the two genres where our young authors spend most of their time. In the outside of that Venn diagram, underneath informational narrative, those are the discrete skills that students take to the task of writing. We're going to learn them on two levels. One is to generate them. We want them to be able to write about them, to be able to use those skills to improve their piece. But on the other level is awareness. So all of us that are here today, whether you're an administrator, a classroom teacher, a specialist, what I want you to think about, our job is to really have students be able to look at literature this way, so that every single time they are in front of literature, they're going to make some decisions right away. What am I reading? Why am I reading it? Why did the author write this? How can I use the information that I know as reading with author's eyes to be able to bring this to the simplest terms, which would be our summarizing frameworks? On the far right and the far left of the slide, you see our organizational frameworks. For those of you who are familiar with Empowering Writers, you know this. We all agree on one framework for informational writing and one framework for narrative writing. It's modified in K and 1, but it takes them all the way through the grade levels. And it works in terms of demonstrating the organization of those particular genres. So as we move forward and look at how we utilize this and why this is so important for our students to understand how writing is put together in order to be able to reproduce it and respond to it, I want you to keep in mind this particular graphic organizer, and we're going to circle back to it in a minute. So with this knowledge, if our students came to the task of this, they would have a clear understanding of author's purpose and how and why they're going to interact with that text. If they're reading for information, they know why they're reading this informative piece. They're going to be able to read more strategically based on that. They're going to understand the organization and the skills that go into it. They'll be able to summarize content and find information effectively by skimming and scanning. And what's going to happen is as we start to teach those foundational salient skills that go into informational writing or narrative writing, they're going to be able to move through these stages incrementally from awareness. I understand what type of writing it is and elements that exist within it, to generative. I know how to apply those elements and create these pieces, to being able to respond to text by knowing what those elements are, how it was created, and how to use that information to gather evidence and respond. So all of that understanding is going to be built in what we consider our literacy launch. That's going to happen in the first few weeks of school, where we spend all of our time with our students really looking at text through the lens of annotation and analysis.